Hey there everyone, good morning, good evening, or good afternoon, depending on wherever you're from. I'm Jeff, this is Tabletop Toolbox, and today I'm going to dig a little deeper into the 2 to 4 player game of Epoch's Course of Cultures. This is designed by Jeffrey CCH and is produced by IceMakes Games out of Hong Kong, who did provide this prototype for review. Now, I've already done a video of this game here on the channel, kind of a 5,000 foot overview showing you how the game looks and giving you a basic idea of how it plays. This video is meant to get a little deeper into the weeds. I want to produce something to help folks who are maybe big fans of the Civilization genre to understand how this game might fit into their collection. So to do that, I'm going to break this down into 3 segments. I've recently played a 2-player playthrough of this game. I've got it set up on the table behind me, and I'm going to show you a little bit about how that game looked at the end, give you a little bit more insight into the different components, and again, help you understand how it might feel to play this game. Then I'm going to come back to this table and I'm going to talk a little bit about the 4X genre of games which they have used to describe this game and kind of give you my impressions on how this game fits into that 4X genre, if it does. And then the last thing I'm going to do is compare this to some other pretty popular 4X or pretty popular Civilization games, namely Through the Ages, Mosaic, Clash of Cultures, and Civilization: A New Dawn. So let me go ahead and jump to the table behind me, show you a little bit about the game, and I'll be right back. All right, here we have the end result of a 2-player game of Epoch's Course of Cultures. I played this game last night with my good friend Daniel, and we just left everything as it was when we finished the game so I could kind of show you what you could expect if you were to ever get this game to your table. I'm going to sort of walk through all the different parts of the game and then get into a little bit more detail of just what certain things do. Again, this is not going to be a full rules recap or a how to play, but I just want to give you an idea of, especially when it comes to the 4Xs, how they are represented in this game. So first we have my player area here. We also have the map on the main, in the middle of the table, and I'll apologize because I did mean to replace my space mat with a more generic wooden tabletop before we played yesterday, and I forgot. So this is going to be a bit more like Epochs in Space. All right, so again, a 2-player map is shown here. You've got 3 rows of 3 tiles. In a 3-player game, we would add another row of tiles to this side, or either side. And then in a 4-player game, another row of tiles down here to a maximum of a 4x4. And you can kind of see, I mean, this is a decent-sized table. A 4x4 grid of tiles would take up a decent amount of space. And of course, with this board over here, you've got a pretty decent play area to contend with when you're playing Epochs. Over here is the military board. I'll talk more a bit about that. This is the sort of inventions market. Now, this is never actually refreshed throughout each epoch, and I'll explain that a little bit more. And then over here is the market of cards. You've got your units market and possibly wonders on the far end. You're always going to have the same 2 cards here in each epoch. So in the 3rd epoch, we have the rifleman and the mortar cards, which again, they're always going to be there in the 3rd epoch. These cards, however, change out throughout the game. We have, this is the 2nd epoch of cards right here, and you can see that I have a mixture of units and wonders that just kind of come out throughout each epoch. Let me jump down here to the play area and show you a little bit more about how you run your civilization. I certainly want to spend a little time and help you understand the play area of Epochs. As you can see, it takes up a lot of space. There's a lot of things here. Just about everything that you see here will not be there at the start of the game, with the exception of an axeman card that would be placed right here. That's all that you start off with, a simple warrior to defend your civilization. Over here is my culture card. So I played the French in this game, and really, all that means is that throughout the game, I have these 4 boxes you can see here on my player board, and those are available to me to sort of unlock throughout the game. And you can only ever unlock 2 of them. And as you can see, I got the art collection and the fashion and luxury. Now, these had costs. And so when I placed these cubes on them again as a free action on one of my turns, I had to pay the cost. And then anything that shows this exclamation point is an immediate benefit. And then this gives you a little bit of an engine building element. So this is saying that every time I would do the government action, I would get a gold. Down here, this said that if I was highest on the culture track, which I was, I gained a gold for basically each space between me and 2nd place. And that was quite nice in the last era. As you can see, I'm sitting on quite a collection of gold. Other than that, this board just stores your components. So these are your influence cubes. You'll use those to put out on the map as you explore. You can also use them throughout the game, placing 2 down here to get any one of the 3 resources. Now let me show you the 3 resources real quick. We have science, production, and food. They're stored here in the top of this little hourglass. And then down here again is your gold. At the end of each epic, your resources convert to gold, usually at a 3-to-1 ratio. The monarchy government lets you do it at a 2-to-1 ratio. Gold can be used as a wild resource. It's also worth half a point at game end. Now here I have all the inventions that I invented throughout the game. This is my Epic 1, Epic 2, and Epic 3. And you can kind of see now I've fanned these back out for the video, but oftentimes, again, when there's an exclamation point benefit, you would take it one time and then you just really don't need it anymore. So I would tend to cover those up. Now this particular card, I believe this was satellites. Satellites gave me an extra military value. So if you're looking at the military, I have an Epic 1 Mountain Warrior going up with some rocket artillery. We thought that was quite funny as we played this game, and that I had this very modern anti-air vehicle that was supported by swordsmen or spearmen out on the battlefield. But, you know, we didn't really get a lot into fighting in this game. We only had to deal with the occasional barbarian that would come out, and I'll get into that when I talk about the map here a little bit. But my military is calculated by the strength of each unit. If I have the same fleet configuration, which is this little, or formation configuration, which is this little icon right here, if I had that on both cards, I would get this bonus. However, I have a technology out here that says all military formations are compatible with each other. So I just kind of always get that benefit. And then this would give me another 1 on my military strength. Anyways, over here are all of my wonder cards. Now, the wonders don't have to get built to a city. You don't have to place them out on the board. You don't have to worry about having space for them like some other Civilization games. When you build a wonder off the market, they simply line up here on the side of your play area. You can see that some of these on the bottom are kind of giving me ongoing effects. These top 4 were just instant effects, instant things that would trigger. And so again, I could just kind of stack those up if I wanted to. All right, moving on. Down here is the government board. You can see that I ended the game with libertarianism, which gives me some endgame scoring based on my demand, and I'll talk about that in just a moment. Whenever you move up these different government forms, following the little arrows that you see, you can get some immediate benefits from upgrading to that government. And then also there's a little production symbol that you see here under each government. That is an action that you can take on your turn. It is your action to just get whatever your government produces. This is kind of that last-ditch effort. If you just really need some food, really need some science, and you're in that form of government, you can use your action to just gain that benefit. We've never used it because it's a pretty weak action. Down here are some glory tokens. These can get stolen from you during combat. As you can see, I still have my starting 5. They're worth 1 point each at the end of the game. And then these are pictures. Now, these are going to be an upgraded component from the Kickstarter campaign, but these are worth sort of a sliding scale of points. Let me grab that and put it into frame here. At the bottom, you can see that based on the number of paintings that you have is how many points you get at the end of the game. And it's basically the cultural victory, right? For staying on the top of the culture track throughout the game, you're going to get more of these paintings, and they'll equate to more points at the end of the game. I do want to real quick mention over here, this is the supply and demand chart. I've kind of mentioned this in passing a few times. So as you expand on the map onto various resources, you're going to gain production, or supply, I should say. So if you're landing on some of these symbols on the map that you see over here, you'll gain 2 or 1 on the supply chart. There are some other things. I think I had, you know what, I didn't get that tech, but there's a pottery tech that also gives you a little extra on the supply. When you build cities on the main map, or when you build these trade route tokens, which are seen right here, and you place those out on another city, that increases your demand. So as you have more supply routes, as you have more cities, your demand increases. And at the end of each epic, you're going to score the benefits beneath the lowest of your 2 tokens. So in this case, at the end of each epic, or at least at the end of my last epic, I got 5 gold, and I got 4 culture on the culture track over here, which I mentioned a moment ago. So that's kind of, you know, the board. And again, this stuff really starts to fill up as the game goes. You can see I'm even kind of encroaching on the map here at the top of my inventions tracks. But this is your engine. Between here and your wonders is all of your engine. This is your military strength. You'll only ever have these 2 units. In military, you have a primary and a support unit that you'll have. These are showing the different advantages that you get in combat. And some of these cards, and I don't have any showing here. Let me grab one off of the market. So this military card here is showing that at each turn you have to have 2 production. That's this orange token. You have to have 2 production on this card every turn if you want to be able to use it in combat, either to defend yourself or to attack other players, attack barbarians, so on and so forth. And lastly, there's a nice spot here to keep your player aid. This is actually a pretty nice player aid. It sort of walks through all the different stages of each turn. It shows you what to do at the end of each epic. It gives you kind of a brief summary of war, some other reminders, and then this part down here shows you all the different actions that you can take on your turn. The symbology here is pretty decent, gives you an idea of what to do and how to do it, at least at a high level, keeps track of telling you what to do with your supply and demand. So this is pretty good. I really like this setup. It takes up a lot of space, as you can see, but it does a pretty good job guiding players throughout the game. Okay, I'm going to come around to the side of my table so I can show you just a little bit more of the map. It's fairly basic, but again, you're going to start with just one of these tiles explored at the beginning of the game, and you're going to flip over one of these tiles at the start of each player's turn until the entire map is revealed, which happens very quickly. We explore the entire map within the first epic of the game. You start off with no presence on the map whatsoever. So even though the center tile is the only one that you can see, you can quickly flip over a tile closest to you and start putting out tokens if that's where you want to go. So one of your actions is to basically expand, and that would simply be placing a cube on the map anywhere you want. And then from that turn, you then have to start playing adjacent to where you have that presence on the board. So I started off, I believe, right here. This tile produces basically gold. You can see there's kind of a gold ring there. That gives you a lot of supply in the game. And other than that, there's no managing of those resources. Just being there means that I get 2 supply throughout the game. Here is a horse token. I've discovered some wild horses, and that would give me 1 production. Now also right here was a barbarian, so you would start off with these brown barbarian cubes. I had to attack them throughout the game. They're a very small and basically weak enemy, but they will attack you at the end of each epic and steal a gold from any player that they have an encampment next to. They never come back out through the game, so once you remove them, they're gone, and you get to immediately take their tile from them, basically placing one of your influence cubes here. Once you control 3 territories, you can place a city at the spot where all those hexes combined. Cities will also give you demand, as I already mentioned, and they also provide some endgame scoring. However, you have to be able to feed them throughout each epic, which thankfully gives you additional rewards. You can see there's a lot of different terrain types. You got your mountains, you got your desert, your forest, your plains, and the way that these tiles come out, there's kind of a chart that tells you how to try and match up the sides. So the game actually tries to prevent having a wild diversity of spaces. So the first preference is to actually put water against water, plains against plains, sand or desert against desert, so on and so forth. And that's supposed to kind of help you get a unified map that kind of makes sense. And so you can actually see we've got this neat little island out here that none of us can explore to. In the base game, you cannot explore across water. I'm assuming that gets added through expansions or other content. But we did have a neutral city that popped out here, and so both of us, my friend Daniel and I, established trade routes with that city, but none of us were ever able to discover what this tile was. We just revealed it at the end of the game because we were curious. But if you were to ever expand onto this territory, you'd be able to then take that resource. So that's a high overview of how the map works. Okay, the middle of this table is a little difficult to film, so please excuse the sideways angle here, but I wanted to show you again just what some of these pieces are. Down here is the military track. Now, I showed you my military units earlier. The rocket artillery had a strength of 6, the mountain warrior a strength of 2, I have the fleet bonus between the 2, and then I had the satellites, which gave me 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So you can see my cube here on the 10 space. Now, the rocket artillery gave me 2 defensive bonus. That's this shield. And so I get to put 2 of these flags on this space. My mountain warriors, however, gave me 2 mountainous advantage, which you see here on this space on the track. Now that means that if I'm getting attacked, I would get to use 2 extra die because this is a defensive space. So anyone who attacks me is going to have to deal with 2 extra dice from me in the attack. And if I'm being attacked in a mountainous terrain, I would get to use 2 dice from this and 2 dice from this to defend that space. If I'm, however, being attacked on the plains, I would still get to use these 2 dice, but I don't have any advantage here in the plains, and so I would get nothing else. Now, Daniel had an advantage in the desert, so if I went to attack him in the desert, he would get this advantage as an extra die to use. His military strength at this point was only 8. That's kind of how this works. Also, you kind of follow this part of the chart right here when you're trying to figure out the priority of matching up the map tiles, as I mentioned just a moment ago. Water first, then plains, desert, and etc. Okay, this here is the invention, sort of a market, but again, the cards are never added to this. You deal out 4 cards at the beginning of each epic to the epics, the current epic level. So here you can see the level 3 inventions that we have, or 3rd epic inventions. And on your turn, if you don't like one of the 6 or however many you have currently in your hand, you can actually swap it with one of these cards to place this as one of your inventions instead. Also, if you do not want to place an invention and want to take 2 turns instead, you would simply cover up a card and then take your 2 actions. So that's how this track works. Now over here is a market at the beginning of your 1st and 2nd epics. You would draw a card from the inventions here. You're basically getting an advance idea of what inventions you'll have to work with in the next epic, which is pretty nice, although there's so much going on that we have found that we really rarely get to pay any attention to them. Now, this is the market of cards that comes out into these 2 columns. I already mentioned with these military units that they are always going to be static for each epic, and so you're always going to have 1 per player in these 2 spaces here, but these are revealed throughout the game, and as new ones become available, they'll slide up. The top one will slide off, and a new one comes out in the bottom. And the same goes for your various wonders. Here is the 3 Gorges Dam, and I think here's a CN Tower that could also come out throughout the epic. And you'll be able to buy these. These have production costs in the top right, whereas your units have science costs in the top right. There may also be additional costs on your units. For example, let me see if I can find one here. I can't find one here, but some of these may require you to have a certain type of terrain under your control. They may also require you to have a particular resource. So for example, some of the cavaliers, some of the horse-mounted units that can come out in the game may require you to have horses, which are a space over on the map. And if you have a cube on a horse space, you can build that unit. And if you don't, you can spend an additional 2 science to make up any requirements that you do not have. Real quick, I have mentioned the culture track. The culture is very important because at the end of the game, this value becomes a 1-to-1 score at the end of the game. So here I was actually at 53. That was 53 points I got just from culture. This is the research track. As you spend the research in science on the side, you'll be sliding this kind of scroll up this track, and the space that you cover, you'll get to choose one of those 2 benefits. So if this one would give you 3 of the production resource and 2 additional influence cubes, those would go over on your player board, and you'd be able to use them to conquer more space on the map or to convert into additional resources where needed. This is, again, just culture, so if I decide up here, I could go up another 2 spaces on the culture track, and you can see here we've got our point modifiers to show where we are in the track. These can even flip over. Oh, no, they can't. I swore I saw a 60 on here somewhere. Oh well, never mind. All right, I hope that was helpful to some folks. I especially wanted to mention, again, the sort of light method in which the asymmetrical aspects of each culture are introduced in this game. You're not going to get a ton of variation between the different cultures, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. It keeps from having a lot of rules overhead or trying to explain a lot of different things to different players. So again, that's going to really come down to what you're looking for in a Civ game. Now, the next thing that I want to talk about is that 4X genre of games. They have described this on their Kickstarter campaign as a 4X game. Now, if you are not familiar with that genre, then 4X usually stands for 4 different aspects of gaming: exploration, exploitation, extermination, and expansion. I almost always forget one of those, so I'm quite proud of myself for getting through that list. Let me go ahead and kick this off first, talking about exploration. Now, as I have shown in that earlier video, there is a map of tiles on the board, and they almost all start face down. You'll have a couple of them revealed face up in the middle of the map at the beginning of the game. And at the beginning of each player's turn, you will flip one tile over until the map is revealed, which will happen very early in the game in the first epic for sure. You don't have to start off in the middle of the map. Of course, you can reveal a tile closer to you, and then you can start to put yourself on that map. You also don't have to get onto that map right away at the beginning of the game. You kind of have a little bit of time before you want to start looking to get presents out on the board. However, you will start to reveal various resources or natural assets that you want to try and get your hands on to help you out throughout the game. So there is some exploration for sure. I just wouldn't say that it is the most important aspect of the game. The different terrain types that come out don't really mean much of anything, at least until you're starting to get into combat. And I'll talk about that a little bit more when I get into the extermination part of this video. So I do believe that exploration is present in Epochs. It's just not a major part of the game, if you will. All right, next I want to talk a little bit about exploitation. This, I think, is the weakest of the 4X elements of the game. The exploitation idea is that you are usually using your population or a workforce or whatever whatever the game refers to your civilization as to generate resources for you. The idea usually being that your civilians or again your workers are generating resources. And I'll talk about this a little bit when I get into comparing some other games. But the weird aspect with Epochs is that you can't just generate resources whenever you need. They're not automatically generated throughout the game either. When you are playing those invention cards at the start of your turn, they will generate some resources for you. You usually get a small little bump in resources just from the card itself, and then the specific text to that card may give you additional resources, maybe of the same type, maybe of one of the other types. It just kind of depends. There is also that element in that when an opponent plays a invention card, usually the opponent on your right, they will also push a couple of resources your way. But you cannot just take an action in this game to get a bunch more resources. There is a very small action attached to your government level, which I did talk about in the other video, that you could use to maybe get yourself one or two extra things. But again, it's not going to have a huge impact on the production of resources in your civilization. So I think that might be a challenge for some folks. You're not just going to have this massive pool of resources that you can grow whenever you need it. And I have found in some playthroughs, and even in the middle of the game, at the end of each epic, all of your resources turn to gold. Gold can be used as a wild resource, which helps you at the start of the next epic, but you're not going to have a lot of just general resources to work with. You're going to have to start digging into those gold supplies until you can start to replenish your resources through those invention cards. And if you take a turn where you don't play any invention card to take two actions instead, again, as I mentioned in the other video, you may find yourself a little starved to pay for those actions in that turn. But of course, that is the push and pull of this game. I think that's what makes it pretty unique. I think that's about it for exploitation. Let me talk about expansion. Now, expansion obviously in these games means that you are expanding yourself across the map. And I think you've seen that a little bit already in the beginning of this video with that map of all the different colored cubes and the city pieces that are out on the board. Expansion is important in the game, but it's not the end-all be-all of the game. Cubes that are on the map are worth a point at the end of the game. Cities are worth 4 points. And so, obviously the more presence you have on the map, the more points that you can get. But, I've seen scores of 130, 135 points. And so, you may be looking at, let's say 14 to 20 points out of that presence on the map. So maybe if you kind of hold back on expansion and instead spend those actions to grow your culture or other things throughout the game, you can probably make up that point difference pretty easily. So there definitely is expansion, but it's not, the only way to succeed at the game. The last thing I want to talk about is extermination. Now, honestly, I'm still kind of trying to figure this one out a little bit myself. I've played this game a couple times, and we've never really gotten into combat. That's for two reasons. A, at this stage with this copy of the game that I have, the rulebook was a little light in details in regards to combat. It's a rough draft of the game. This is still very much in development. And so, we kind of had to go a little lenient on that because obviously the game is still in development. However, we're also a bunch of Care Bear players. A lot of my friends are not very big into combat or fighting, and so though a few of us were kind of tempted to check it out, we were also like, well, gosh, I can try and go fight a little bit, or I can build that wonder, which is going to give me a lot of points, because ultimately we want to win the game, right? So combat is used in this game in a few ways. It's used to steal points from your opponents. You can take maps off of the map. I'm sorry, tiles or cubes off the map. I'll get my words together here in a moment. You can conquer those cubes and sort of take over territories. You can also conquer a player's cities, making them your own. You can also steal gold from other players. Gold is worth half a point at the end of the game. And as I mentioned, it's also a wild resource, so that can be a way to kind of help keep fueling your engine throughout the game. And then lastly, each player starts off the game with 5 glory tokens, and these can be stolen in combat. They're worth 1 point at the end of the game. So in a 4-player game, the most that you have out there in glory tokens is 20 points. As I mentioned, you can easily get scores up into the 130s or so, maybe even higher if you're better at the game. And so you're looking at, like I said, about 20 points or so in a 4-player game out of those tokens. So you kind of have to weigh, okay, well, how much can I possibly get in combat? If I roll high, there is a military strength to your units, as I've already mentioned, and then you are chucking dice to kind of add to that value. There is another element of this, though, in that when you want to go and fight another player, you have to declare yourself a warmonger. And if you are a warmonger at the end of the epic, you can't just make it go away, by the way. If you are a warmonger at the end of the epic, you're going to lose points on the culture track related to which epic you're in. 1 point for the first, 2 for the second, 3 for the third. So you're going to go down that culture track at the end of the epic, and that culture track is a 1-to-1 conversion to points at the end of the game. So if you're doing a lot of fighting, you could lose 6 points on that track. And of course, I've already talked about point spreads, so that's not really a huge value, but of course, things may not go your way. And if you get beaten in combat, then suddenly you're losing that culture, and you're losing the control of the expansion on the map, and you're losing the glory, and maybe the gold, and whatever else. There's also an aspect, as I believe I've already mentioned in this video with the recap at the beginning, is that some of your units kind of have to be supplied for the military to work. So for example, especially in the Epic 3, the tanks and the jets and such that come out into play, they are expensive to keep working, and you have to provide that cost every turn. At the beginning of your turn, the resources that you put on those units gets wiped, and you have to resupply them each turn. And as I mentioned, resources can be a little tricky to come by. And so if you have to keep that military engine of yours fed, it could become very expensive. So I think it's very interesting that there is a really unique push and pull to the combat. And I think that's another reason why we haven't really delved into it, because we're just not sure that the ends justify the means of combat. And we're kind of okay with that because we're not really big fighty players anyways. But, when you think about the fact, okay, I've got to get this, I got to get extra resources so I can provide for my units. I have to research those units themselves. Also, as I've mentioned, the territories that you control on the map have a little bit of an impact in what your military can do. And I'll give you a quick example. In that last 2-player game, my friend Daniel, who I was playing with, he started to explore the map. He started to get some military units at the same time, and he ended up with some military units that didn't do well in mountains. They basically could not attack mountain tiles, and they did not have an advantage when fighting in mountainous areas. And he ended up controlling a ton of mountainous regions, which meant that if I started coming there and take that land from him, he couldn't claim it back because he could not fight in the mountains. And so he kind of realized, well, geez, I've wasted a lot of turns, a lot of technology, a lot of my science resource to get a military that isn't effective for the terrain that I have. And what that means is that you kind of almost want to determine what your expansion goals are going to be on the map before you even start building your military. And by then it could be possibly too late, depending on who you're playing with. So again, all of that comes together in a really unique way. And I think that if you're looking for a really heavy combat game, this may not be the route that you want to take. But if you're looking for a game that really gives you some challenging decisions to make, do you want to fight? Is it maybe worth it to hold back? Then this is definitely a good example of that. The other thing that I find pretty interesting, or I think maybe beneficial at least to players, is that if you've got someone at the table who's just doing a lot of fighting, or it looks like they're about to start coming after you, they do get a little bit of an advantage in that they can purchase a military, they can claim themselves a warmonger, and make an attack in that same turn. So you might get hit a little bit in that turn of theirs, but then on your next turn, you've got a chance right away to research a military unit yourself and put yourself either in the advantage or at least on a level playing field with them, making yourself a more challenging target to them, maybe a less desirable target to them. So there's not a lot of struggle to build up that military. Yeah, you've got to invest a turn into it for sure, but as long as you have the resources available, as long as you've kind of been playing the game effectively, which you could do very well with wonders and technology, inventions, whatever, you should be able to bounce back pretty quickly and at least level the playing field before someone just runs away with a military victory. So I wish I could talk more about military. Again, I don't have all the rules quite sorted out with this. I have asked some questions to IceMakes and gotten some pretty decent answers, and I think I'm going to be trying to, maybe kind of help them to get the rule book where it needs to be, because combat is a big aspect, and there's a lot of fringe cases that gets involved with combat, and I'll obviously want to make sure that folks get the best experience there. So that is what I think about Epochs from the 4X genre. Let me go ahead and talk about some other games. All right, so this next section was actually requested by IceMakes. I've been in communication with their marketing director, and she asked if I could help out, as there had been a lot of questions in how to compare Epochs to some other pretty well-established Civilization games. And having played a good number of them, I thought I would try and help out. So I'm going to be comparing all of these to Epochs, and the first one is Clash of Cultures. Now, right off the get-go, this one's going to be a little tough, because I haven't actually played this. I've had this game for a good while. I really do want to get it played, and I just have not had a chance. This is also the original, not the monumental version of Clash of Cultures, which is out. However, I've done a little bit of research into this game. I'm slightly familiar with the rules, and so I've drawn up a couple of comparisons with this real quick. The first being that Clash of Cultures has a very defined tech tree. So unlike Epochs, where you are simply drawing, collecting these invention cards and playing them in whatever order you would like. Now, you are stuck within the specific epochs at each era. So you're going to play Epoch 1 cards, then Epoch 2, then Epoch 3. This one's going to require you to follow a very specific tech tree, and as much as I understand, all the tech trees are the same, and so players are going to have similar options to work with, while as in Epochs, you can branch out very quickly and have a very different civilization from someone else. Now, there are duplicate cards in Epochs, though I think there's only 2 of each card, so not everyone is going to have access to the same text, whereas here you would. Now, the mapping in Clash of Culture is very similar to Epochs. In fact, they use a hexagonal tile system, almost like to be the exact same size and shape as Clash of Cultures, which I thought was kind of interesting, again, having not played this. I do believe that the map environments make a bigger deal in the game, so you actually have to go into forest tiles to try and get wood and so on and so forth, while, as I already mentioned, in Epochs, it's pretty much just those invention cards that are giving you resources. The terrains of the map don't really matter unless you're getting into military. One thing that I did think was a bit more interesting with Clash of Cultures is that there are barbarians in Epochs, as I already mentioned, but once you've taken them out, they don't come back. While as in this game, I believe that the barbarians have a bit more impact in the game. They may attack you, they may come back. Their movement is a bit more random from what I understand. They may leave you alone for a couple turns, and again, it's a bit more of a random ordeal. So I thought that was pretty interesting. If you're looking for more sort of NPC engagement, this is probably going to give you more of that than Epochs will. Lastly, this game doesn't really go through different eras. You don't really feel like you're playing an evolutionary game. As it's been described, this is pretty much all set in more of the ancient time frame. While in Epochs, you absolutely do feel like you're getting through ancient, I believe it's medieval, and then modern eras. And so you start off with swordsmen. As I mentioned at the beginning of this video, I had swordsmen backing up an anti-aircraft tank, which is pretty funny. It actually was quite entertaining. So you definitely get that more in Epochs than I think, honestly, many of the other games that I will be talking about here. And lastly, there are no asymmetrical aspects to this game. Everyone's just playing the same culture, and that's really about it. So combat is a little bit more random in this. There is some tech to back up combat, but doesn't seem to have as much of an impact on combat as it does in Epochs. And I think that's at least a good idea of how you might compare this to Epochs. All right, the next one I want to talk about is a game that I do not have, but I have played, and this is Through the Ages. Through the Ages is a massive, very, very complex, very heavy, and very, very long game. So let me talk about a couple comparisons right off the get-go. There is no map in Through the Ages. The world is much more abstracted. You have a board in front of you that kind of represents your culture. You're playing cards around it to kind of dictate what is in your civilization, but it's not even necessarily a city. It's just kind of like, almost like different tracks and different upgrades. It just tracks in general what your culture is able to do. There is a massive market in Through the Ages, a long row of cards that is constantly being refreshed with new things. And that market is where you get everything from, whether it's wonders, military, new leaders, a new government. Everything comes out of that market. And what that means is that if the thing that you need is maybe just too expensive at that moment, you just flat out can't get it. There's no way to, sort of jump ahead and grab something that you really need. And there isn't quite the flexibility that I think there is in Epochs, in that, you can work on military one turn, you can turn right around and work on your government the next turn. Everything's a lot more even keel, and you're not quite as dependent on a market, except for those military units themselves. Again, that market revolves very quickly. There are a lot more units that come out in each epoch than there are wonders. And so the wonders might be the one thing that you find yourself a little starved to get, especially if you've got someone at the table like me who just keeps buying all of them up. So a big difference there with Through the Ages. Lastly, there is a lot more emphasis on the happiness of your people. There are these little smiley face tokens that kind of come out throughout various cards and texts and governments and leaders and whatever, and you have to try and keep your people happy, or your costs of operating that civilization kind of starts to go up. So as I mentioned, this is a very, very, very long game. The first time that I played this, I think we were at it for 3.5 hours, and we had only gotten through 2 of the 3 eras. There is that sort of evolution of time in this game, in that, you're going to start off with Mahatma Gandhi and, older, say, folks, and then you're going to end up with Bill Gates, as various leaders that you can work with throughout the game. But again, it's all just kind of present on cards, as it mostly is in Epochs as well. So a very, very long game, a very, very deep game, a much, much heavier game. If Through the Ages is a 5, then I would tend to say that Epochs is a little bit more of a 4. Again, that's kind of my opinion based on a couple of plays. If I wanted to say something is a little closer to a 3, I would lean this direction, to the upside down box of Mosaic. This is a story of civilization. This is definitely the most recent game of all of these to come out. I think this one came out in maybe 2022, if even not a little later than that. And there is an expansion, which I won't be talking about. I have it, but I have not played it yet. But it might interest you a bit more in what it does with combat. So first of all, with Mosaic. Mosaic is a big footprint of a game. Takes up a lot more space than Epochs, which is a pretty decent table hog in of itself. But the map is a lot bigger. It is also static. You lay out a large board, basically of the globe, and that's just the map that you're always going to have to work with. So there is no terrain. There is no emphasis on type of land. There's only a little bit of division of space across the oceans, but even then it's very easy to kind of hop anywhere you want to be. In fact, you can pretty much put down new cities anywhere you want to go. You can just pop right up in someone's backyard, which is important because each region on the map plays as its own little area control element, and that is the way that combat works in the base game. So if someone controls a lot of area, you can just start putting cities into their areas. It's very, very easy to do, to try and at least wrestle some control, or at least come in second place, which also scores points in the area control element of this game. There is a production action in this game. So if you need stone, or if you need ideas, which is how you go about purchasing technologies or inventions, you can just produce what you need. Typically, you may have something that you don't produce as well as something else, and in that case, you can just try and get some money, which you can then use to purchase resources that you need. So money kind of acts like a wile, just like gold in Epochs, except for there is a 2-to-1 conversion of money to resources in Mosaic versus a 1-to-1 in Epochs. There is not as much engine building in Mosaic. So the one thing that I really like about Epochs is the way that your inventions or your wonders or even your government can kind of help you trigger additional things. So there's one particular government that whenever you build a wonder, you just get to take another action. And there's another government that when you do a expansion action on the board, you can immediately do another expansion action. There are various cards that will come out that say, well, if you build a city, maybe you get some resources back. Maybe you get to take another action. And the way that you can trigger those things together makes some really, really big turns that feel very rewarding to trigger. And that's a lot of fun. There isn't as much of that in Mosaic. There's a little bit, but I feel like a lot more of this game is trying to set up for your end game. So you've got various things that you can build. A lot of the inventions will all kind of trigger end game stuff. Okay, if you build this particular thing, then all of your symbols, all of your cards that show a certain symbol may give you extra points at the end of the game. So, again, a very different way of tackling that sort of civilization idea. Turns are a lot quicker in Mosaic, despite it being a much bigger game. I do think the production of this game is a lot better. The map and all the pieces look really, really nice. The boards are just very vibrant in color and art direction. A little bit more, I think, than out of Epochs. And what else did I write on here? As I mentioned, there's not a lot of engine building, so it feels a little harder to get going in the direction that you want to go. There's a lot of markets, a lot of different markets of cards in this game, and they cycle through very quickly, especially the inventions deck. And the building deck just goes very, very quick. So maybe there is a tech out there that you really want, and 3 turns before it gets back to you, it's already gone. There's not as much of that in Epochs. As I did say, the inventions and the wonders cycle through fairly quickly, but there's a lot of duplicates, so you got a good chance of still getting what you need, and your government board and all that stuff is exclusive to you, so you have a lot more agency over those actions. So there's also no asymmetry in this. You're just a civilization, and that's really about it that I have to say about Mosaic. It's a very, very good game. I do like Mosaic, but as I mentioned, I think it's a lot lighter, so I would put that more of a 3 in difficulty next to Epochs, a 4, and Through the Ages at a 5. The last game I want to talk about is very, very heavy because I have an expansion in here and a very heavy organizer. This is Civilization: A New Dawn. This is based on the Sid Meier's Civilization universe. This is the, I believe, second Sid Meier Civilization board game to come out. This one's a very different animal. And I think it's a lot clunkier of a game. The rules are very, very hard to get through, and the expansion really turned a lot of it on its head because a lot of people did not like how especially combat worked in the base game. And so the expansion really changed things up. Now, this uses a sort of a charging method to your actions, a lot like the game of Ark Nova, if you're familiar with that. And if you're not, you've got a variety of actions that you can take, like expansion, like moving, like doing merchant trading type things, or military. And you have this board in front of you with numbers of 1 through, I believe, 5. And every action that you take, that card comes off of that track, goes to the far left, and resets, and it becomes weaker. So as cards shift to the right, they become a lot more powerful. And so you may do a really powerful military action, and then you've got to wait several turns of doing other things before you can trigger that action again. And unlike Ark Nova, there is no sort of boosting ability. In Ark Nova, there are tokens that you can acquire that you can spend to sort of make an action more powerful than it currently is on your track. This doesn't have that, and I really, really, really wish it did. Anyways, another big difference with this, now the map is randomly explored just like Epochs, and I think the grids are a lot smaller if I remember, so the maps themselves are more robust, a lot more emphasis on the terrain. You actually have to move over the terrain, which is harder based on the type of terrain, and so you may need to have stronger actions values, your cards at stronger placement on that track before you can move over certain types of terrain, which again makes the game a little difficult to get around because, well, if you've got 2 mountains across, it could take you 5 turns to get over both of those mountains because you need to have a level 5 action on the movement to get over a mountain, if that makes any sense. There are also, one thing that reminded me about this game from Epochs is the way that resources are printed on the map. I've shown in some of the pictures already that there are resources printed on the tiles. Now, in Epochs, when you land on one of those resources, they simply boost your supply. It is now a resource that you're producing. What the resource is doesn't really matter unless, again, you're trying to build military. So I think, as I already mentioned, if you are on a horse space, you can then research mounted military units, cavaliers or whatever. In this game, the resource itself really matters. And so you may be sitting on a oil, location, a location that generates oil, and that will then open up certain options to you. But if there's a card out there that you really need that requires metal or something along those lines that you just don't generate, you may just simply not be able to get that thing. At least with Epochs, there is that workaround that, okay, I don't have that resource, I'm not sitting on a space that generates that resource, but you can spend an extra 2 science to get what you need to sort of jump over that hurdle. So I did really like that. As I mentioned, this is, it's a very complicated game, but more in just the idea of understanding the rules. I don't feel like the rules are very well written in this, even with the expansion. And in my plays of this, I've always kind of sat there just trying to understand how certain things work. So, yeah, Civilization New Dawn, again, a very neat looking game, but I don't know that I would actually prefer it over Epochs. So, a few other notes. Epochs does sort of boil down that 4X experience just a little bit. As I said, exploration is kind of there, exploitation not so much. The extermination or combat factor still needs to get fleshed out, I think, a little bit. I think it's there, and I think it's pretty interesting, and at some point, I'm sure I will get to delve into it a bit more. Again, I don't think this is the game to get. If you want to do a lot of fighting, I think the Clash of Cultures is probably the right one for you. Epochs reminds me a bit of Mosaic in the fact that a lot of times when when players get into combat, when they really start focusing on that area control element, they lose focus on the other aspects of the game, and they typically lose the game. In fact, every time I've played this, I have almost completely avoided the area control element. I try to do just enough to make sure that I'm relevant in the scoring as it happens throughout the game for area control, but I never focus on it. So I'm usually behind as we go into endgame scoring and then always end with a victory. And I think that that is how Epochs can work as well. Now, again, if someone just really builds up a strong military and you all ignore them, you might pay for that. So you got to try and make sure that you're at least, again, in the running. Make sure that you're not too far behind, but you don't necessarily have to engage in combat to win. I think the game can play fairly quick. I think that Epochs, as you start to get an understanding of it, as you get over that initial learning curve, the game does pick up. In fact, in all of my playthroughs of this, the first Epoch was a little slow, especially with a new player who was kind of trying to figure out, what does this do? How does this work? Sort of poring over all their options. The second Epoch flies by, because then you understand the game. You started to create some goals for yourself, and you're zipping through it. And then in the third Epoch, it actually starts to slow back down a little bit as people are trying to squeeze every last little bit of score out of all their actions. And that's when the game gets pretty juicy. And so I really enjoyed that. I really like the engine building in this game. I think of all the Civ games I've mentioned, maybe with the exception of Through the Ages, this one's got a really neat engine system. And again, it can become very different across all the players at the table as different inventions come out, different wonders get collected, different governments get selected, and changes how everyone gets to play that game. I would like to see more of a market out of this. As I mentioned, the wonders don't come out as often as I would like them to. I do like that the wonders are a lot easier to build than in almost all the other games that I've already mentioned. And I am a tad bit concerned about the replayability of Epochs. In all of my games, we've gotten through almost the entire market deck. We've seen basically every unit and every wonder that is in the game. May not necessarily have built them all, but we have seen them all. With the inventions, there's a lot of invention cards in the box for each Epoch, but there are duplicates, as I already mentioned. So you're still likely to see most of those inventions in maybe at least 2 or so playthroughs. And there is a market that comes out. I think I mentioned this, if not earlier in this video, definitely in my other video. There is a sort of a market of inventions, but it does not ever get replaced. You put 4 cards there at the beginning of each Epoch, and then you can trade with ones that are out there to play any one of those. But there's no way that actually that market gets refreshed throughout the game. And I would either look to maybe house rule that, or maybe suggest that something like that gets added into the game. And again, it's not going to make a huge difference. I wouldn't even necessarily recommend it for every turn or every round, but maybe halfway through the Epoch, wiping that market and putting down a fresh 4 cards may just give players a little bit more agency. And again, I do like the idea that you can skip an invention if you want to be able to take 2 actions and get yourself a little maybe caught up with other players. I like that option exists for folks. So I think that is a pretty good in-depth analysis of Epochs. I have enjoyed the game. I really, really have. I think that the rules need to get fleshed out a little bit more, and I'm sure that that will happen. I like the, I love the engine building of the game, as I've already mentioned. I like the divergent play that kind of comes out of it. I like that folks start off very similar and then kind of start to head in different directions. I like that there's not a ton of cumbersome asymmetry to deal with, and I do like the table presence and overall presentation of the game. Pretty neat game, Epochs. Check it out on Kickstarter. Active right now out there on the platform, running through May of 2024, probably ending in very, very early June of 24. So go and check it out if you're interested. Thank you so much for watching. I hope this has been useful to you. Let me know in the comments if you have any additional questions, comments, or concerns, or maybe something I wasn't very clear on. Hopefully I haven't contradicted myself at all in this video. But thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you again soon. Cheers.